Morning, Bridgetown Church. My name is Nick Parker. I'm the children's minister here, and I am here with Mark and Kathy. And Mark and Kathy are part of the team that is going to Redbird Mission in the summer of 2024. Redbird is in Beverly, Kentucky, and they've gone on a number of mission trips over the years, and they are hoping that you will join them for this upcoming trip. So, Mark, Kathy, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, why would you say that a short-term mission trip to Redbird is something that you want to encourage people to go on?
Well, Redbird is extremely well equipped, and a week-long mission trip at Redbird, you actually get something done. At the end of the week, you have something to show for it. And that, among other things, is a super awesome thing because, you've either replaced a floor in someone's house, you've built a wheelchair ramp from them, and it's done at the end of the week, and you can celebrate that.
That's awesome. The sense of that accomplishment.
Yes.
Yeah. Kathy?
Yes, and truly making a difference. Like you said, Mark, truly making a long, impactful difference in someone's life, day-to-day living.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that too is it's a short-term mission trip, but yet it's a long-term lifetime change for you. Because when you're there, you are just making so many incredible, impactful memories. You're seeing God at work. While you're there in the home, while you're on the grounds, while you're in fellowship with all of the other teams at night, when you're talking, when you're sharing together, it's just something that stays with you. So yes, it's a short-term mission trip, but this is a lifelong impact. Yes, thank you. Impact that stays with you, that you remember, that you go back to. In the middle of the day, something might strike you that that was really a special moment.
Yeah.
And to be able to share that with your family and other church friends and new friends that you make when you're there, it's just... it's Redbird.
It is, it's
It's
Redbird.
Redbird. Well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for that encouragement. I hope that you will consider going with Mark, with Kathy, to Redbird in the summer of 2024. And so if you want to learn more about this opportunity, there's a short Q&A right after church in the fellowship hall. So just head downstairs right after church and you'll find out if this is something for you and for your family. It might be something you want to jump in and be a part of. And if you have kids in Bridgetown Kids, feel free to pop down, get them checked out, or you can leave them with us. We'll take good care of them as you are learning about this unique opportunity.
Hey, how's it going? Doing all right? Good. Hey, if it's your first time here, welcome. We're glad that you're here. We know that it takes a little extra courage to step into a place where you don't know anybody or you're unfamiliar with, and so we're excited, truly humbled that you are with us here this morning. We're in the middle of a series on the book of Mark, as you can see. And if you haven't gotten one of these Bible journals, they're on the table next to the doors where you first came in. And so go ahead and grab one of those. But if you don't know me, my name's Eric. I'm one of the ministers here. I'm part of the teaching team. And something about me is that I love Halloween. Like when I was a kid, I loved dressing up and going out and trick-or-treating and all that good stuff. And when I had kids of my own, I loved to take them trick-or-treating as well. And I've got a picture of one of my favorite years. They made their own costumes out of boxes, and I just love it. It's just so much fun. And one of the things I love about Halloween is that it's one of the only things that we as a culture do together, like as a community. It's a big community project. It's like one of the only things that we do with our neighbors, right? And there's a lot of work that goes into Halloween. You got to get the costumes, you got to get the candy, and you can't, skimp out, and you got to buy the full-size candy bars so you're the good house on the street, right? And so it's a big project, but we do it every year, and I just love that about Halloween. One of the other things about Halloween that I've noticed, and I'm not sure if this is a good thing or not, it's just an observation. It's one of the only times in the year that our culture acknowledges that there might be something beyond the physical realm. There might be something beyond kind of the causes and effects that we can measure, right? And that kind of scares us a little bit. We're kind of weirded out by the fact that there might be a spiritual realm that affects and interacts with the realm that we are kind of familiar with, right? And so what we do with those fears is we make movies out of them, right? Like I saw that there's a new movie coming out called, that's a sequel to the Exorcist movie back from the 70s. And today we're talking about just that kind of thing. We're talking about spiritual things, demons, right, affecting a person's physical reality. And so I thought it would be interesting. I Googled how many movies have an exorcism in them. And I found a Wikipedia page that had 105 different movies listed, which is a lot of movies. But I know it wasn't an exhaustive list because I could name 2 or 3 that weren't on that list, right? There's a lot of movies about this. We've talked about this a lot in our culture because it scares us, but also because we're just speculating on what that might look like. And I think that these movies are kind of a collection of all of the things that we think about this spiritual reality interacting with the physical reality because they're all the same, right? Like it starts off with a family that's happy they're living in this house, and maybe it's a brand new house or something, but the electric is all wacky. It starts, flickering, and then a light bulb explodes, and then they look up and their kid's crawling on the ceiling, and so they got to call the Catholic priest, and it's got to be a Catholic priest, so they have to have that collar, so if the demon tries to choke them, it protects them, right? No, I don't know. But every priest comes and they have kind of their toolkit, right? They've got special prayers. They've got a little leather satchel. It's really nice. Somebody made it for them. It's got a crucifix in it and a bottle of holy water. And they go into the room where the demon-possessed child is, because it's always a child, right? And none of those things work. And so I don't know why they have this toolkit, right? Because what really is going to work in their estimation is they've got to figure out something. There's some mystery that they've got to decipher. It's like maybe there's a relic that this person got in contact with, or maybe there's some medieval text that I've got to find that will give me the clue, or maybe I need to find out this demon's name or whatever. And so there's this long drawn-out battle between the exorcist and the demon, and eventually they find out the mystery and they release the demon, and then they set it up for a sequel, right? That's like every one of these things. And so these are a collection of our thoughts about these things, and they've not just sprung up out of nowhere. We've speculated about these things for thousands of years. And we've kind of come up with this mythology that's based on true stories and based on the Bible, and not that the Bible's not a true story, but it's based on a lot of different aspects, right? And that creates a problem for us, because when we get to the book of Mark, one of the major things that Mark teaches us about Jesus is that he's an exorcist. Like he's going around constantly driving demons out of people, right? And if we take our expectations of what an exorcist looks like and we just kind of apply those to Jesus, we end up kind of confused. And so we're gonna have to peel back the layers of those thousands of years of history and get into the mind of a first century person and kind of understand what they think about exorcists, what they think about demon possession, so that we can understand what Mark is saying is different about Jesus from their story, right? And this is a deep, deep rabbit hole that I went down the last couple of weeks. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, but we're just going to kind of cover the surface of this, okay? And so what I want you to do is go ahead and grab your Bibles. We're going to do some art time with Eric. We need like a jingle or something on it. But turn to Mark chapter 5, and on the blank side of the sheet, I'm going to tell this story as we draw a picture together, okay? And so here is the story. Let me get my pen out. Go ahead and draw a circle. Okay? God created the world. In the beginning, God created the world, and in that world, he created a special place, the garden. And so go ahead and draw a square in the middle of that circle. And in that square, in that garden, that place of life and light, he placed two people, Adam and Eve. But there was somebody else in that garden as well, right? There was a talking snake. Now, this talking snake was a spiritual being, and we know this because he was talking. And snakes don't usually talk, at least not in my experience. And so we've got a spiritual being, and we've got two human beings. And the spiritual being, kind of convinces the human beings to rebel against God, and then all three of them are kicked out of the garden. And then the rest of the story is people and spiritual beings rebelling against God and creating darkness and death and chaos all throughout the world. So just kind of put some darkness in your circle there, right? And they're going around, the demons, the humans, the people that are following the snake, the people that are following the snake are kind of creating all of this mess all around. But here's what God does, right? He kind of separates out all of the nations, and he chooses one for himself. This one nation is going to be his light in the midst of the darkness. So what I want you to do is just write Israel. Israel is God's light in the darkness. He turns all the other nations over to these other evil spiritual beings, these other demons that call themselves gods, right? And he preserves Israel as his own place of life and light. And so what we see throughout the history of the Old Testament is this dueling genealogy between the people of the serpent and the people of God, the people of darkness and the people of light. So some people, they follow God and they create light and life and order all around them. And some people create darkness and death and chaos. And Israel isn't immune to this. Like, they participate in the darkness and chaos and death as well. But God still holds on to Israel for a reason. He wants to give the people a way back into that life and that light. But all of these spiritual beings are roaming around and creating chaos and havoc and death and disorder and all of these things. And they do that in a number of different ways. And one of the ways that we see them doing that is through demonization. And I say demonization, it's what our Bibles usually translate possessing people. But I think that word has kind of has an ownership meaning to it. But demons can't own people. They can only kind of borrow them, right? Because they don't have the power to own anybody. They just have the power to borrow somebody for their own means, for their own purposes of sowing death and disorder and chaos. And in the first century mind, again, we're not thinking our level, we're thinking first century level, right? In their mind, the darkness, the forces of darkness, demons and all that kind of stuff, have a lot to do with a lot of different things. And one of those things is actually illness, right? They think that, some people, when they get sick, it's because they have a demon. And so it's important to note, when we read the Bible and when we read other ancient Near Eastern texts, we see that there's other exorcists going around and healing people from demons, okay? And they're kind of a lot like our vision of a Catholic priest, right? They've got a little toolkit. So the Catholic priest has their special prayers. They've got the crucifix and the holy water. And the ancient Near Eastern exorcist would have special incantations and potions and methods that they would use to drive out these demons. And so what we think probably happened with some of these guys is they stumbled upon some medicine for certain kinds of illnesses, and they would give people these medicines, and they would do their incantations or whatever, but the medicine is what would affect them, right? And that's why when we read in exorcist handbooks from the ancient Near East, they talk about how important it is to figure out the name of the demon that they're trying to drive out. Because just like in modern medicine, we need to know the diagnosis before we can give them the prescription, right? And so it's kind of the same kind of thing. But what Mark tells us is that Jesus is categorically different than what's going on there. Because there's a lot of things that we see in the stories about demonization that don't fit with like a physical or mental illness. Like some of these people have superhuman strength, right? Like this guy in our story, he's breaking chains, right? And they have special knowledge sometimes. And when Jesus goes up to some of these people, sometimes he talks to the demons and they talk back. And you can't talk to epilepsy, right? You can't drive multiple personality disorder into a bunch of pigs. There's something categorically different about what Jesus is doing. And Mark makes it a point to say that Jesus is going around healing and casting out demons, right? And that's why I think everybody's so amazed by what Jesus is doing when he goes around casting out demons, because it's just different. It's different than their story. It's different than our story, right? There's no pea soup, or there's no, struggle. There's no mystery. He doesn't have to know their name. Like he asks this guy what the name of the demon is, and he tells him, "I'm Legion, for I am many." That's not a name. That's a description of what he is. He's thousands of demons inside of this guy, right? And what we see right at the beginning of the story, is that thousands of demons are begging at Jesus' feet. And so this isn't a story like our modern horror stories. And this isn't a story like their ancient Near Eastern exorcism stories. This is a story of immense power. Of immense power. And we see that this man has been brutalized. Just simply brutalized by the people around him and by the demons inside of him. He's cutting himself with sharp stones. He's isolated and alone in the graveyards, being chained up repeatedly. And when you think about it, when you think about the townspeople and why they would do this to this man, I think you can't blame them, right? This guy is causing lots and lots of trouble. He's causing lots and lots of darkness. He is a force of darkness in their midst. And so it makes sense But still, it leaves this man isolated and alone. And we don't know how it happened. The Bible doesn't tell us how he got all of these demons inside of him. Like maybe he tried to exploit the spiritual powers and they ended up exploiting him instead. Or maybe he was just unlucky. We don't know. What we do know is that by the time that Jesus comes around, he can't help himself. He can't do anything about his condition. And Jesus sees him in that state of helplessness, and he has compassion on him. And so not only is this a story of immense power, it's a story of immense compassion on this man that has been brutalized. We're gonna do a little word search here in our Bible. So go ahead and turn to Mark 5 again. And in verses 1 through 20, I want you to underline every time it says either the word begged or pleading. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do this. There's 4 times that it does that. So let's go ahead and get our timer up on the screen here while we do all this. And once you get it done, you can watch the skeletons dance for a while. Begged or pleading. It's in there 4 times. Time is up. Who got all 4? Raise your hand if you got all 4. Nobody got all 4? Oh, you got it. Good. Who got 5? There wasn't 5, it was 4. Okay, so there's 4 instances where people beg or plead. It's actually the same Greek word that's translated 2 different ways. But who begs first in the passage? Just shout it out. The demons, yeah. So the man with the demons, they beg and they fall at Jesus' feet and they ask him, "Hey, can you not send us out of this place? Don't send us out. Don't make us leave this place." And I think the reason that they don't want to leave is because they're in that land of darkness. Like what we said before is that spot of light is Israel, right? And Jesus isn't in Israel at this point. He has walked into Gentile territory. It's a place called the Decapolis, right? It's a place where when the demon greets Jesus, when he falls at his feet, he calls him the Most High God, which is a way that foreign nations would address God in the Bible, right? And so he falls at his feet and he asks, "Don't send me out of this place." But then he begs a second time, and he begs to be thrown into the pigs instead, right? Let me ask you this. Does Jesus grant his request? He does, yeah? He sends them into the pigs, right? Legion goes into the pigs. These 2,000 pigs go crazy. They run off a cliff, right? So Jesus grants their request, and it leads to their own destruction. All right, who's the second group of people that plead with Jesus? The crowd, the townspeople, the people, right? And what they want is Jesus to get out of there. And I think this is really telling. I was talking to Kyle, who read the passage earlier, about this very passage a while back. And he pointed this out. He said, they come and they see the man in his right mind, and they're afraid. They're scared. This is crazy. They're amazed, right? They're in awe. Then they see the pigs, and they ask Jesus to leave because they care more about the pigs than they care about this man that has been completely healed. This man who was full of darkness, but now was in his right mind. Right? And so, does Jesus grant their request? Yes, he does. He's starting to get in the boat, and then somebody else begs him for something. Who begs him the third time? The man himself, right? And he begs that he can go and follow Jesus. Does Jesus grant his request? No. Like, of all of the beggars in this passage, I would think that this was the guy that Jesus would grant his request. He grants the request of demons and the townspeople, but he doesn't grant this guy's request, right? What Jesus tells him to do is he tells him to stay in that place. And I want to ask you, like, would you want to stay? If you were this guy, would you want to stay in the place where the people dragged you out to the graveyard and chained you up, where they cared more about the pigs than they cared about you? I think probably the worst thing about staying, in my mind, would be the fact that I was a source of great darkness and chaos in that place. I'd be embarrassed to stay, right? And so it makes you wonder, why would Jesus tell this guy to stay? Because this isn't just a story of immense power. It's not just a story of immense compassion, but it's also a story of light breaking into darkness. See, one of the things that we find in the book of Mark is over and over and over again, Mark is telling people, hey, Jesus is telling people, don't tell anybody what I did for you. He's telling people not to stay and talk about what they experienced, right? And it's kind of crazy that Jesus here, he's telling this guy, no, stay and talk about what I did for you. And it's kind of like, well, why does he do that with all of the other people and he doesn't do that with this guy? Well, it's because in Israel, they had an expectation of what the Messiah was supposed to be. And Jesus kind of had to flip their expectation on its head. Israel's light had dimmed over the course of the Old Testament. They got exiled, they weren't following God, and they didn't quite know what they were looking for in a Messiah. And so when Jesus comes as the true light, so on your picture, you can go ahead and underneath Israel, just write Jesus, because he is the true light. When they encountered the Messiah, he was doing things he was saying things, he was teaching things that kind of went counter to what they thought or believed before. And so the theory is if that word got out too soon, people would just kind of attribute things to Jesus and he wouldn't have a chance to kind of establish who he actually was. And people would just kind of believe the Messiah story that they had been told that wasn't quite who Jesus was. So he's got to turn their expectations upside down. But here in the Gentile territory, in this land of darkness, there weren't any expectations. And so the man could share his story. He was filled with darkness, and now he's filled with light without worrying about all of the misunderstandings that might happen. And so when Jesus does something for us, when Jesus brings the light into our life, out of the darkness, what we have to do is we have to follow him in whatever way he asks us to follow him. And so in this case, he tells this guy, you live in a land of great darkness. Go and be the light. Underneath Jesus, I want you to write us or me. Because what Jesus calls us to when we experience his goodness, when we experience his power and his compassion, he calls us to be a light in the midst of our darkness. when Jesus comes back to this place a couple chapters later, he's not met with a man that has thousands of demons inside of him. He's met with thousands of people who want Jesus' light, who want his power, who want his compassion. How did they know? How did they know that he was the guy? Well, because they knew this guy. They knew the guy that used to have thousands of demons inside of him had been completely filled with light. So when we come to a passage like this, it might be hard to kind of connect, well, what does this have to do with anything with us, you know? Because I have not seen demonization of people in quite this dramatic a fashion, right? And you know, the question, I've heard about stories, especially from missionaries that go to other countries. They'll come back and they'll say, yeah, this stuff happens all the time over there. It's like, why doesn't it happen here? Like, what is the difference between America and the rest of the world? And C.S. Lewis writes this quote. He says, there are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence, and the other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist, which is what we are most of the time, and a magician with the same delight. And so the theory would be like, maybe it would just be counterproductive for the demons to do this kind of thing, you know, superhuman strength and knowing things that they wouldn't know before, you know, that kind of stuff. Because it would convince us that there is something beyond this physical realm and drive us towards Jesus. But the other thing is that this darkness isn't just spiritual darkness. It's not just spiritual forces that are creating that, it's us too. Because in that original rebellion in the garden, it wasn't just the serpent, it was us. We created darkness and death and disorder as well. And so it doesn't have to be demons. It can just be our own sin that enslaves us and snowballs into something that we cannot control. One of the things that's always kind of confused me in the Bible is there's all of these nations that sacrifice to idols, right? And they're sacrificing big things. It's not just like little bit of this and that. It's like their children, right? And it's like, how could you know that Bob down the street made that little wooden idol, right? How could you sacrifice your child to that thing? And I think this is what it is. One day, you want it to rain. And you heard that if you put a little bit of wheat on this altar, it'll make it rain. So you're like, okay, I got some wheat, put it on the altar, and it rains. Because these spiritual powers that hide behind these idols, they're liars. They say they're gods, but they're just demons, right? And they have some power, and so they can make it rain. So then, you know, the next time you need it to rain, you're like, oh, I'll just put some wheat on this altar. And it rains. Oh, this is awesome. I got a little magic button. I just press it and it rains. But then the next time, you put a little wheat on the altar and you go out and it's clear blue skies. Maybe he's a little bit more hungry. I'll get him some meat. So you put some meat on there and then it rains. And so you're producing this little ritual where you're finding out, or at least you think that you're exploiting this power, making it do what you want it to do, all the while not realizing that the spiritual power is manipulating you by giving you less and demanding more. And so it builds on itself. So you're putting more things on the thing until you get rain, and then you put more things on, and then you get rain, and more and more and more, until you're putting your child on the altar for nothing. for nothing. We all want a magic button that gives us what we want when we want it, right? But when we find something that does that, the pattern is it constantly asks us for more while giving us less. Like Netflix, right? And that's a little bit of a joke. But we don't sacrifice for rain anymore because we got the supermarket, right? But we will sacrifice our time, our money, our attention, and even our children on the altar of dopamine and convenience and comfort and pleasure. And the more we sacrifice, the less we get in return. When we try to exploit spiritual powers, they always end up exploiting us for their purposes, making us a stain of darkness and chaos and death in the world. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we allied with the serpent or are we allied with God? There are things that we can't control, death and disease and disaster, and the evil forces use those to try to distract us and try to get us away from God. But the point here is that you don't have to be crawling on the ceiling. Like the darkness touches us all. We are slaves to sin, and many times we become powerless to control ourselves. And we know people that are controlled by their brokenness, by their addictions, by their past, by what has been done to them. And we know it's ruining their lives. They're not easy to be around, right? I'm not easy to be around when I'm living out of my brokenness. And nobody else is either. And so we become isolated and alone, standing in a graveyard by ourselves. Sin is ruining their lives, but it's ruining our lives. It's ruining our lives as well. And maybe you want out of that cycle. Maybe you want out of that graveyard of darkness. Maybe you want into that light, into that garden, into that right relationship with Jesus. With Jesus, better is possible. And this man knew it more than anybody. And he was called to step into that work. Because when you experience the better, you've got to follow Jesus however he asks you to follow him. Whether that's following him on the boat or whether that's staying where you are and telling everybody that you know, everybody who's living in the darkness, that there is a man that has taken your darkness away, that has given you great light and life. There is power and there is compassion for us. And we've got to share that power and compassion with everybody that we know who has been brutalized by sin and the forces of darkness in this world. With Jesus, better is possible. The world we live in is dark. It's dark. We know it. We experience it every day. We turn on the news and it's dark. It's just darkness all the time. The world needs us to be this light. The world needs you. Your neighbors need you to be the light in their lives. Bringing them to Jesus. It's like, that's hard to do, right? So how do we do that? You go on a journey of discipleship. You learn how to follow Jesus. And there's three things that I think kind of help put this in a little box. How do you follow Jesus? First, you rest in the truth of his gospel. You rest in the truth of his gospel. And this means that you learn his story. You learn what he's done for you. You learn the truth of who he is, how much he loves you and cares about you, and you accept that, and you live in that truth. Right? And if you're not sure how to do that, it's mostly through like spiritual practices, coming to church and reading your Bible and praying and that kind of thing. But if you're not sure how to do those things, we actually have a program called Believer Basics. And the idea is you get with a mentor for 8 weeks and you go through some scripture and you go through some spiritual practices and you get in the habit of talking to other people about what it's like to follow Jesus, what it's like to do these things. And so if you're like, I need to find out how I can rest in the truth of the gospel, go to the next page. Go to the kiosk in the lobby after church today and sign up for Believer Basics. You can do it with a friend that you know that has been following Jesus, or you can just ask us and we'll pair you with somebody to do it. So you got to rest in the truth of the gospel, but you also have to root into the family of God. You have to root into the church. And one of the best ways to do that is through small groups. Because one of the things we have to do is we have to practice compassion for one another before we go out and try to hit the darkness with the compassion of Jesus. We got to practice it first, and we got to practice it in a place that's safe, in a place that's filled with the love of Jesus. And that's what church is all about. It's about spurring one another on and encouraging one another as we go to stay in the light. So you got to root yourself. And small groups, there's 2 small groups that are still accepting members right now. One meets on Tuesday, one meets on Wednesday. If that doesn't fit with your schedule, another way to root yourself into the church is just to serve. Find a place where you can serve. And there's a button on the next page where you can find a place to serve. So do that. Rest in the truth of the gospel. Root yourself in the family of God. And then you got to replicate. And that's, I think, the hardest part. Because you're light walking into darkness, right? And you've got to create more light as you go. And that's intimidating, and it's hard, and it's scary. And one of the first steps towards this, I think, is just inviting people to church. Inviting people to things that we do. There's an event coming up. It's called Parfaits, Pals, and Pizza. And this is a Bridgetown Kids event. And I was thinking about this. It's like, how could we invite a bunch of kids to come to church if we're just, maybe we don't know anybody who has kids. Maybe we have kids, or maybe we don't. So how could we do this? Well, in a couple of weeks, if you turn your porch light on, a bunch of kids will come to your door. And so you can take these and put them alongside of your full-size candy bars, because you're a good house, right? And just drop them in their bags, right? It's an easy first step into this idea of replicating. There are 1,000 of these sitting on the Gateway Cafe. So think about how many, trick-or-treaters will come to your house, pick up a stack that you think about estimates that, right? And then hand them out. Hand them out. These are first steps, but when we are ready, we need to share our full story with people. We need to share the story about how God took our darkness and made it light. And in our story, when Jesus comes, there are literally thousands of people ready to hear his message, because there was a man who was a walking and talking picture of the truth of Jesus' good news. And he was going around telling people his story, bringing the light to the darkness, and we have the opportunity to do that as well. Every week, one of the ways that we practice this story together of Jesus bringing light to our darkness is through communion. If you've not gotten one of these, they're on the table in the back there. And if you have experienced this story, if you believe this story, we want to invite you to participate with us in this. We do this to remember that Jesus had compassion on us when we could not help ourselves. To remember that we can have compassion on other people. We do this to remember that he had the power to face the death that we deserved. He had the power to face that darkness and come out on the other side. And so we can give our lives away to our neighbors, to our friends, to our community, to our family without fear. We don't have to fear death because Jesus took that for us. He took our death and gave us life. He took our darkness and gave us light. So we're going to take communion right now. And when he had given thanks, he broke the bread and he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, after he took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes back, until he comes and fills the whole world with his light. So now, may you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear the good news of Jesus. May you take the steps to rest and root and replicate today. May you look at the areas in your life that God has repaired, where he has put you back together, where he has made you an agent of light, though you were once filled with darkness. And may you share the good news with somebody that you know Jesus, and there is no one, there is nothing better.